The courtroom was silent, except for the heavy breathing of a man who looked like he hadn't seen a decent meal in weeks. Dressed in tattered clothes, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard, he stood alone at the defendant's table. His hollow eyes stared back at the judge, who glared down from her high seat, lips curling in disdain. "And what exactly qualifies you to speak on your own behalf?" Judge Louise Adler sneered, her voice echoing through the courtroom. "Do you even understand what self-representation means? This isn't some movie where the underdog miraculously wins." The gallery snickered as the man tightened his grip on the edge of the table. He remained silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and controlled. "Your Honor," he began, "I am fully capable of defending myself. Just give me a chance to explain." But the judge only smirked. "Explain? Oh, please. Spare me the Hollywood monologue." The snickers grew louder. The man's lips parted to say something, but then, as if deciding against it, he stepped back. The judge leaned forward, ready to deliver another verbal blow, when suddenly the man reached up and pulled off his scruffy beard. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Next came the wig, revealing shiny black hair underneath. His tattered coat fell to the ground, exposing a casual yet well-fitted shirt. The laughter died instantly as every single person in the room realized who was standing there, staring straight into the judge's stunned face. "Your Honor," the man said again, with a small, amused smile. "I think I've heard enough." It was Keanu Reeves. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People stood, craning their necks for a better view, while murmurs of disbelief filled the room. Judge Adler's face turned ghostly pale. Her jaw dropped, but no words came out. For a moment, it seemed like even the walls of the courtroom were leaning in closer to see what would happen next. Just a few days earlier, on the bustling streets of Los Angeles, Keanu Reeves, one of the most beloved actors in the world, was preparing for a new role. Known for immersing himself completely in his characters, Keanu decided to go undercover as a homeless man for a week to better understand the struggles of those living on the streets. Disguised in a patchy coat, baggy pants, and a fake beard, he spent his days blending into the city's forgotten corners. He slept on park benches, scavenged through dumpsters, and shared stories with real homeless people who had no idea they were talking to a movie star. One cold evening, while Keanu sat near a convenience store, sharing a sandwich with a man named Gus, trouble found him. A group of rowdy teenagers began harassing them, yelling insults and throwing half-empty soda cans. Keanu tried to defuse the situation peacefully, but when one of the teens lunged at Gus, he stepped in to protect his newfound friend. The scuffle didn't last long. Keanu managed to subdue the teens without throwing a single punch, using a mix of quick reflexes and calm reasoning. But when the police arrived moments later, it was Keanu who ended up in handcuffs. The teenagers had painted a very different picture of what happened, claiming that the homeless man had started the fight. Despite his protests and Gus's attempts to vouch for him, Keanu was taken to the station. The officers ignored his pleas, assuming he was just another vagrant trying to talk his way out of trouble. He was charged with assault and resisting arrest and told to prepare for a court date. Keanu had a choice. He could reveal his identity immediately and avoid the ordeal altogether. But as he sat in the holding cell that night, listening to the stories of other homeless men who had been unfairly treated by the system, he realized this was an opportunity to shine a light on the injustice they faced daily. He decided to keep his identity a secret and go through the legal process as if he were truly one of them. When his court date arrived, Keanu stood before the judge, ready to defend himself. He had spent days preparing his argument, determined to prove his innocence and show the court that appearances could be deceiving. But from the moment Judge Adler saw him, she made it clear she had no respect for him. Now, as the courtroom buzzed with shock at his reveal, Keanu stood tall, waiting for the commotion to settle. He locked eyes with the judge, whose arrogance had vanished in an instant. "You were saying something about Hollywood, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and sharp. The room fell silent again, all eyes on Judge Adler, who looked like she wanted to sink into her chair and disappear. But before anyone could say another word, the sound of heavy doors slamming open interrupted the scene. Two uniformed officers stormed in, their expressions grim. "We need to remove Mr. Reeves immediately," one of them announced, their voices urgent. "There's a security threat in the building." The courtroom froze, the collective tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Keanu Reeves remained calm, his sharp eyes shifting toward the officers as the chaos began to unfold around him. Judge Adler stammered, her earlier arrogance replaced by visible unease. What kind of security threat?" she managed to ask, her voice wavering. The lead officer, a tall man with a clipped mustache, ignored the judge and addressed Keanu directly. "Sir, we need to get you to safety. Now." Keanu didn't budge. Instead, he calmly raised a hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. "If there's a security threat," he said evenly, "then everyone here is in danger. I'm not leaving until I know they're safe." The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a response. "Mr. Reeves, this isn't a debate. We need to escort you out immediately. It's a matter of protocol." Before Keanu could respond, Gus, the older homeless man he defended, stood up from his spot in the gallery. "This ain't right," Gus shouted, his voice rough but firm. "They're just trying to get rid of him, 'cause they know he's telling the truth." The officers moved toward Gus, but Keanu stepped forward, placing himself between them and the older man. "He's not the problem," Keanu said firmly. "Let him speak." Judge Adler banged her gavel, her voice trembling as she demanded order. "Sit down, all of you. This is my courtroom." But no one sat down. The tension continued to climb as whispers spread through the room. People began speculating. Was the security threat real, or was this just an excuse to remove Keanu from the proceedings? Just then, a loud bang echoed from somewhere outside the courtroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of raised voices. Everyone flinched, and several people gasped. The officers immediately reached for their radios, muttering codes into their devices. Keanu, however, remained steady, his expression unreadable. "Get everyone to safety," he said to the officers, his voice calm but commanding. "If there's a real threat, we need to act fast." The lead officer hesitated again, but eventually nodded. "All right, everyone, please exit the courtroom in an orderly fashion," he barked. The gallery erupted into movement as people began filing out, their curiosity replaced by fear. Judge Adler, still seated at her bench, looked utterly lost, as if the situation had spiraled far beyond her control. Keanu turned to Gus and motioned for him to follow. "Come on," he said quietly. "We're not sticking around to find out what that was." Together, they made their way toward the exit, blending into the throng of people. But as they reached the doors, one of the officers stopped Keanu again. "Wait," he said, his eyes scanning the actor's face. "We're supposed to take you somewhere secure." Keanu shook his head. "I'll be fine," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Take care of the people who need it most." Before the officer could respond, another bang echoed through the building, this one much closer. Screams erupted as the crowd pushed and shoved, desperate to escape. Keanu grabbed Gus by the arm and led him toward a side hallway, away from the panicked masses. "This way," Keanu said, his voice low but urgent. The two men hurried down the narrow corridor, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The noise from the courtroom faded behind them, replaced by an eerie silence. Gus glanced nervously over his shoulder. "You sure about this, man? Feels like we're heading straight into trouble." Keanu gave him a reassuring look. "Sometimes you have to go toward the trouble to fix it." They rounded a corner and came face to face with two shadowy figures. Both were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by masks. One of them held a metal baton, which he tapped ominously against his palm. Well, one of the figures said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look who we have here. A real-life movie star playing hero." Keanu didn't flinch. "You must be the security threat," he said coolly. The second figure chuckled. "Smart guy. Too bad brains won't help you now." Before either man could make a move, Keanu stepped forward, his stance relaxed but ready. Gus started to protest, but Keanu silenced him with a quick glance. "Stay back," he murmured. The first man lunged with the baton, but Keanu sidestepped effortlessly, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting it in one fluid motion. The baton clattered to the floor as the man cried out in pain. The second figure charged, swinging wildly, but Keanu ducked and countered with a sharp elbow to the ribs. It was over in seconds. Both men lay groaning on the floor as Keanu calmly picked up the fallen baton. He tossed it aside and turned to Gus, who was staring in wide-eyed disbelief. "You really are John Wick," Gus muttered. Keanu cracked a small smile. "Let's keep moving." They continued down the hallway, leaving the would-be attackers behind. Keanu's mind raced as he tried to piece together what was happening. Who were those men? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? As they approached an exit, Gus suddenly stopped, grabbing Keanu's arm. "Wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hear that?" Keanu listened intently. At first, he heard nothing but the faint hum of fluorescent lights. But then he caught it, a low, rhythmic clicking sound like the ticking of a clock. His eyes narrowed. "Stay here," he told Gus, moving cautiously toward the source of the noise. It didn't take long to find it. Just around the next corner, Keanu spotted a small black device attached to the wall. Red lights blinked ominously on its surface, and the ticking grew louder as he approached. It was a bomb. Keanu froze, his eyes locked on the blinking lights of the bomb. The ticking sound seemed to grow louder with each passing second, a relentless reminder of the danger they were in. Gus peeked around the corner, his face pale. "Is that what I think it is?" Gus whispered, his voice trembling. Keanu nodded, his mind racing. "Yeah," he said quietly. "And it's live?" Gus took a step back, shaking his head. "Man, we gotta get out of here. That thing's gonna blow, and I don't want to be anywhere near it when it does." But Keanu didn't move. He crouched down, studying the device carefully. It was small, sleek, and disturbingly sophisticated. The timer on its face displayed a countdown. 5:48, 5:47, 5:46. "This isn't just random," Keanu muttered to himself. "Someone planted this here on purpose." Gus stared at him, incredulous. "What are you doing, man? You think you're some kind of bomb squad now?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a small pocket knife from his belt, part of his disguise as a homeless man, and carefully pried open the bomb's casing. Inside, a tangled web of wires greeted him, each one glowing faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Red, blue, or green," Keanu murmured, his fingers hovering over the wires. "It's always one of those." Wait, Gus hissed, waving his hands frantically. "You're not seriously going to mess with that thing, are you? What if you cut the wrong wire?" Keanu glanced at him, a calm determination in his eyes. "If I don't, everyone in this building is in danger." Gus opened his mouth to protest, but stopped when he saw the conviction in Keanu's expression. "All right," Gus muttered, stepping back. "But if we die, I'm haunting you." Keanu smirked faintly before turning his attention back to the bomb. He reached for the green wire, his movement steady despite the gravity of the situation. Just as his fingers brushed against it, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Keanu," a familiar voice called out. Keanu turned to see one of the officers from the courtroom rushing toward him, his face a mix of panic and relief. The officer stopped abruptly when he saw the bomb, his hand flying to his holstered radio. "Don't touch it," the officer shouted. "The bomb squad is on their way." "There's no time," Keanu replied, his voice calm but firm. "We've got less than 5 minutes." The officer hesitated, his hand gripping his radio tightly. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" "No," Keanu admitted, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But I've seen a lot of movies." Gus groaned loudly. "This ain't the time for jokes, man." Ignoring the banter, Keanu focused on the wires again. He took a deep breath and made his decision, snipping the green wire with a swift, precise motion. The timer on the bomb stopped instantly, freezing at 4:23. For a moment, there was silence. Then Gus let out a loud whoop of relief, clapping Keanu on the back. "You did it, man. You really did it." The officer exhaled sharply, his shoulders relaxing. "That was reckless," he said, though his tone was more impressed than angry. "But you saved a lot of lives." Keanu stood, dusting off his hands. "Who planted it?" he asked, his tone shifting to something more serious. The officer shook his head. "We don't know yet. But this wasn't random. Someone knew you'd be here, and they wanted to cause chaos. Keanu frowned, his mind churning. This whole thing started the moment I stepped into that courtroom, he muttered. It's connected. Before anyone could respond, the radio on the officer's belt crackled to life. All units, we got a second device on the lower level. Evacuate the building immediately. The officer cursed under his breath. We need to move. Now. Keanu exchanged a glance with Gus. Looks like we're not done yet, he said. The three of them made their way toward the nearest exit, navigating through the labyrinthine hallways of the courthouse. Along the way, they encountered frightened employees and bystanders, all desperate to escape the unfolding chaos. Keanu paused to help a woman who had twisted her ankle, guiding her to safety before continuing on. As they reached the lower level, the air grew colder, and the fluorescent lights flickered ominously. The second bomb was easier to spot, its blinking red lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. But this one was larger and far more complex. The timer read 2:15. 2 minutes, the officer said grimly. We're out of time? Keanu stepped forward, his expression resolute. Not yet. Gus grabbed his arm, his eyes wide. You can't be serious, man. That thing's twice the size of the other one. What if you can't stop it in time? Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Gus's shoulder. Trust me. With that, he crouched in front of the bomb and got to work. The wires inside were even more tangled than before, and the timer ticked down mercilessly. 1:45. 1:30. 1:15. Keanu's hands moved quickly but deliberately, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The tension in the air was palpable, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, with just 20 seconds left, he snipped the final wire. The bomb powered down instantly. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Gus let out another cheer, hugging Keanu tightly. You're a freaking superhero, man, he exclaimed. The officer nodded, his respect for Keanu evident. You just saved this entire building. Again, Keanu stood, his face calm, but his eyes sharp. This isn't over, he said quietly. Whoever's behind this, they'll try again. The officer frowned. What are you saying? Keanu glanced toward the nearest exit, his jaw tightening. I need to find out who's doing this. And I need to stop them before it's too late. The sound of sirens filled the air as the trio exited the building. Emergency vehicles surrounded the courthouse, their flashing lights illuminating the night. Reporters and onlookers crowded the scene, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Keanu took a deep breath, his mind already formulating a plan. This was no longer about self-defense or clearing his name. Someone had targeted him, and they were willing to put countless lives at risk to do it. As the crowd buzzed around him, Keanu's resolve hardened. He wasn't just going to sit back and let this happen. He was going to fight back. The crowd outside the courthouse was electric, with reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing incessantly. Despite the chaos, Keanu moved through the sea of people with quiet determination, Gus trailing nervously behind him. Mr. Reeves, why were you in court disguised as a homeless man? One reporter yelled, shoving a microphone in his face. Is it true you defused a bomb inside the building? Another shouted. Keanu ignored them, his focus unshaken. His mind raced, piecing together the events of the day. The bombs, the attack in the hallway, the sneering judge. It all felt connected, but he couldn't yet see how. He needed answers. A firm hand on his shoulder pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see the officer from earlier, his face grim. Mr. Reeves, we need to talk, the officer said. There's been another development. Keanu nodded. Lead the way. Gus hesitated, shuffling his feet. You sure about this, man? Maybe we should just lay low for a while. Keanu gave him a reassuring look. I appreciate you sticking with me, Gus, but I need to figure this out. If you want to leave, I understand. Gus shook his head quickly. No way I'm bailing on you now. Let's do this. The officer led them to a nearby police vehicle, where a small group of detectives stood huddled around a laptop. One of them looked up as they approached, his face lighting up with recognition. Keanu Reeves, the detective said, extending a hand. Detective Morales, heard you've had quite the day. Keanu shook his hand, his expression serious. What's going on? Morales gestured to the laptop. where security footage from inside the courthouse played on the screen. It showed the two attackers Keanu had confronted in the hallway, moments before they had crossed paths. This footage was pulled from the courthouse cameras, Morales explained. We've identified these two as part of a known paramilitary group with a history of targeting high-profile individuals. They specialize in causing chaos and making it look like someone else's fault. Keanu frowned. Why would they target me? Morales hesitated. We're not sure yet. But there's more. He clicked to another clip, this one showing a man in a suit speaking to the two attackers outside the courthouse hours before the trial. The man's face was partially obscured, but his stance and gestures suggested he was giving orders. Keanu leaned closer to the screen. Can you identify him? Morales shook his head. Not yet, but he was definitely pulling the strings. The realization hit Keanu like a punch to the gut. Someone had orchestrated all of this, the false charges, the courtroom chaos, and even the bombs. But why? What was their endgame? Before Keanu could voice his thoughts, a uniformed officer approached the group, his expression urgent. Detective Morales, we just got word of another threat. A call came into dispatch. Someone claiming there's a third bomb, this time at Union Square. Morales cursed under his breath. This is escalating fast. Keanu straightened, his jaw tightening. I'm coming with you. The detective raised an eyebrow. You're not a cop, Reeves. This isn't your fight. Keanu's gaze was steady. It became my fight the moment they put innocent lives at risk. Let me help. After a tense pause, Morales nodded. Fine, but you follow my lead? Union Square was a sprawling hub of activity, its usually vibrant atmosphere now replaced with tension and fear. Police cordoned off the area, evacuating civilians while bomb squads moved in, their movements deliberate and focused. Keanu, Gus, and Morales arrived in an unmarked car, stepping out into the chaos. The air was thick with tension, the crowd of evacuees murmuring anxiously as they watched from a safe distance. Morales turned to his team. Any updates? One of the officers pointed toward a large fountain at the center of the square. The threat caller said the bomb is hidden somewhere near the fountain. We got a team sweeping the area now. Keanu scanned the square, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Something felt off. The fountain was the obvious location, but it also seemed too easy. If the attackers were smart enough to plant two sophisticated bombs at the courthouse, why make this one so predictable? He glanced at Gus, who stood nervously by his side. Stay close, Keanu said, and keep an eye out for anything unusual. Gus nodded, his face pale but determined. Got it? As they moved through the square, Keanu's instincts kicked in. He scanned the faces in the crowd, looking for anyone who didn't belong, anyone who seemed too calm, too focused. That's when he saw him. A man in a dark hoodie stood near the edge of the police line, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He wasn't watching the fountain nor the bomb squad. He was watching the crowd. His gaze was sharp, calculating, and entirely out of place. Keanu nudged Morales, nodding subtly toward the man. That guy. Something's not right. Morales followed his gaze, his hand moving instinctively to his holster. Stay here, he said, motioning for backup. But as Morales approached, the man bolted, pushing through the crowd with surprising speed. Without hesitation, Keanu took off after him, his long strides quickly closing the distance. Keanu, wait! Gus called out, but it was too late. The chase wove through the busy streets surrounding Union Square, the man darting down alleys and cutting through crowds in an attempt to lose his pursuer. But Keanu was relentless, his years of training and physical conditioning paying off. Finally, the man made a critical mistake, turning down a dead-end alley. He skidded to a halt, spinning around to face Keanu, his chest heaving with exertion. You don't want to do this, Keanu said, his voice steady. Tell me who you're working for. The man sneered, pulling a small device from his pocket. Keanu's eyes widened as he realized what it was, a detonator. Before the man could press the button, Keanu lunged, knocking it from his hand. The device clattered to the ground, and the two men grappled, their movements fierce and chaotic. The man fought desperately, but Keanu's strength and precision gave him the upper hand. With a final, powerful shove, Keanu pinned the man against the wall, his forearm pressed firmly against his throat. "Talk," he growled. "Now." The man smirked, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think you've won? This is bigger than you, Reeves. Bigger than any of us." Before Keanu could respond, a deafening explosion rocked the air, its force knocking him backward. He hit the ground hard, his ears ringing as debris rained down around him. For a moment, everything was a blur, sounds muffled, vision hazy. As Keanu struggled to his feet, the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. The bomb had gone off. The explosion tore through Union Square like a thunderclap, sending a shockwave that rattled buildings and shattered glass for blocks. Keanu staggered to his feet, the ringing in his ears blending with the screams of terrified civilians. Smoke billowed into the air, creating a haze that obscured the devastation. The man he had been chasing was gone, swallowed by the chaos. A quick glance revealed the detonator lying in pieces on the ground, useless now. Keanu clenched his fists, frustration boiling within him. He had been so close to stopping it. "Gus," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Gus, where are you?" A few agonizing seconds passed before Gus appeared through the smoke, coughing but unharmed. "I'm here," he rasped. "What the hell just happened?" Keanu grabbed Gus by the arm, steadying him. "We need to find Morales," he said urgently. "And we need to see how bad it is." They pushed through the rubble-strewn square, dodging fleeing civilians and emergency responders rushing toward the blast site. The fountain, which had been the suspected target, was now a mangled heap of stone and metal. Nearby, firefighters worked to extinguish flames licking at the remnants of nearby kiosks. Over here, a voice called. Keanu turned to see Detective Morales, a deep gash on his forehead, directing his officers as they triaged the wounded. He looked up as Keanu approached, relief flashing in his eyes. "You're alive," Morales said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Thank God." Keanu nodded grimly. "Barely. What's the situation?" Morales gestured to the chaos around them. "We got at least a dozen injured, maybe more. Could have been worse if the evacuation hadn't started. But this," he motioned to the destruction. "This wasn't just about causing fear. This was a message." Keanu's jaw tightened. "A message for who?" Morales met his gaze. "For you." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Keanu took a slow, steadying breath, his mind racing. The attackers had gone to great lengths to set this up. The courtroom, the bombs, the chaos. It was all part of a bigger plan, and he was at the center of it. "What about the guy I chased?" Keanu asked. "He had the detonator." Morales shook his head. "No sign of him. He must have slipped away in the confusion." Keanu cursed under his breath, frustration bubbling over. Every step forward felt like it was met with a new obstacle. But he couldn't afford to give up now. As the emergency crews continued their work, a faint vibration in Keanu's pocket caught his attention. He pulled out his phone, its screen glowing with an unknown number. His brow furrowed as he answered. "Hello." A distorted voice crackled through the line. "Impressive," it said. "You're quicker than I expected." Keanu's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled, low and menacing. "Let's just say I'm a fan. You've been quite the entertainer today." "This isn't a game," Keanu snapped. "You're putting innocent lives at risk." The voice ignored him. "You've shown you can handle yourself under pressure, Mr. Reeves. But the real test is yet to come." "What do you want?" Keanu demanded. "To see if you're as good as everyone says," the voice replied. "If you're truly the man they all think you are." Before Keanu could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, his mind racing. Whoever this person was, they were watching him, orchestrating every move like a twisted puppet master. And they weren't done yet. "What was that about?" Gus asked, his voice shaky. Keanu slipped the phone back into his pocket. "They're taunting me," he said quietly. "This is all a setup. They're testing me for something, but I don't know what." Morales stepped closer, his expression grim. "Whatever they're planning, it's not over. We need to stay ahead of them." Keanu nodded. "Agreed. But we can't just wait for them to make the next move. We need to find them." Morales hesitated. "You've got a target on your back, Keanu. Whoever these people are, they're clearly after you. If you keep chasing them, you're putting yourself and everyone around you in danger. Keanu's gaze hardened. They've already made it personal. I can't just walk away. Gus sighed heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess that means I'm sticking with you, huh? Keanu smiled faintly. I wouldn't have it any other way. Later that night, Keanu, Gus, and Morales regrouped at a secure police facility, poring over everything they knew so far. The footage from the courthouse, the profile of the attackers, the phone call, it all pointed to a carefully planned operation with a singular focus: Keanu himself. Morales spread a series of photographs across the table. This is the man from the courthouse footage, he said, pointing to a grainy still of the suited figure giving orders. We've run his image through every database we have, but nothing's come up. Either he's a ghost, or he's using high-level counter-surveillance. Keanu studied the photo, his mind working overtime. Something about the man's posture, the way he carried himself, it felt familiar, but he couldn't place it. What about the group the attackers belong to? Keanu asked. Do they have any known associates? Morales nodded. A few. We're following those leads now, but it'll take time. Keanu's phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking. Another unknown number. Don't answer, Morales warned. It could be a trap. Keanu hesitated for a moment before hitting the green button. What do you want now? The distorted voice returned, colder this time. You're running out of time, Keanu. If you want to save them, you'd better move fast. Save who? Keanu demanded. The line went dead again. Keanu looked up, his face pale. They've got hostages? Morales cursed under his breath. We need to track that call. Now. But before anyone could act, a notification popped up on Keanu's phone. It was a video message, accompanied by a single text, clocks ticking. Keanu opened the video, his stomach tightening as the screen filled with a chilling image. A group of frightened civilians, tied and gagged, sitting in a dimly lit room. The camera panned slowly, revealing a large digital clock on the wall behind them. It was counting down. 4:59, 4:58, 4:57. The room fell silent as everyone stared at the video. The sight of the hostages, frightened, bound, and helpless, was burned into Keanu's mind. The digital clock behind them kept ticking down, its red numbers glowing like a grim reminder of the stakes. 4:45, 4:44, 4:43. We need to act now, Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. Every second counts. Detective Morales grabbed a nearby laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Let me try to trace the video's origin, he said, his tone clipped. If they sent this directly to you, we might be able to pinpoint their location. Gus paced nervously, muttering under his breath. This is bad, man. Real bad. Whoever these guys are, they're serious. Keanu put a reassuring hand on Gus's shoulder. We'll figure this out, he said. Stay focused. The tension in the room was palpable as Morales worked, his brow furrowed in concentration. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Finally, he looked up, his face a mixture of triumph and urgency. Got it, Morales exclaimed. The video was sent from an abandoned warehouse on the east side of the city. That's got to be where they're keeping the hostages. Keanu nodded. Then that's where we're going. Morales hesitated. Keanu, this isn't a movie. You can't just walk in there and expect to save the day. These people are dangerous, and they've already proven they're willing to kill. Keanu's gaze was steely. I'm not walking away while those people are in danger. If I don't do something, who will? Morales sighed, clearly torn. All right, he said reluctantly, but we do this my way. No heroics, no improvisation. We plan this out. The drive to the warehouse was tense and quiet, the only sound the hum of the car's engine. Morales had mobilized a small team of trusted officers, each one briefed on the situation and prepared for the worst. Keanu sat in the back seat with Gus, his mind racing through possible scenarios. You ever done anything like this before? Gus asked, his voice low. Keanu gave a small, rueful smile. Not exactly, but I've trained for roles that required similar skills. It's not the same, but it's better than nothing. Gus shook his head. Man, you're braver than I'll ever be. Keanu glanced at him, his expression serious. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Gus. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. Gus nodded, taking the words to heart. As they approached the warehouse, the tension in the car rose. The building loomed ahead, its windows shattered and its exterior covered in graffiti. It looked like the perfect hideout for someone who didn't want to be found. Morales parked a few blocks away, and the team disembarked silently. They gathered in a huddle, going over the plan one last time. "We'll move in teams of 2, Morales said. "Keanu, you'll stay back until we secure the area." Keanu shook his head. "If this is about me, I need to be there. They might use the hostages as leverage if they see I'm not involved." Morales hesitated, but eventually nodded. "Fine, but stay close to me." The group moved toward the warehouse, their footsteps silent on the pavement. The air was heavy with anticipation, every shadow and sound heightening the tension. As they reached the building, Morales signaled for the team to fan out, covering all possible entrances. Keanu and Gus followed Morales to a side door, their movements cautious. Morales picked the lock quickly, and the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The sound of muffled voices echoed from somewhere inside. "They're here," Morales whispered. He motioned for the group to move forward, their weapons at the ready. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the voices grew louder. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his breathing steady, his focus unshaken. Finally, they reached a large room at the center of the building. Peeking through a crack in the door, Keanu saw the hostages. They were huddled together on the floor, their eyes wide with fear. 2 masked men stood guard, both armed with automatic rifles. "We'll need to distract them," Morales whispered. "If we go in guns blazing, the hostages could get hurt." Keanu scanned the room, his eyes landing on a stack of metal barrels near the far wall. "I've got an idea," he said quietly. Before anyone could stop him, Keanu slipped away, moving silently along the outer edge of the room. Gus watched with wide eyes, clearly worried, but didn't make a sound. Keanu reached the barrels and gave them a small push, sending them clattering loudly to the ground. The sound echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot, drawing the attention of the guards. "What was that?" one of them barked, moving toward the noise. As the guards investigated, Morales and his team sprang into action. They stormed the room with military precision, taking down the distracted guards before they could react. The hostages screamed, but the officers quickly reassured them, cutting their bindings and guiding them towards safety. Keanu joined Gus in helping the hostages to their feet, his movements calm and deliberate. "You're safe now," he said, his voice steady. "Let's get you out of here." But as they moved toward the exit, a loud click stopped them in their tracks. Keanu turned to see a third man standing in the doorway, a pistol aimed directly at him. This man wasn't masked, and his face was familiar. He was the suited figure from the courthouse footage. "Going somewhere," the man sneered. The room fell silent, the tension unbearable. Morales raised his weapon, but the man shook his head, holding up a small device in his other hand. Ah, he said. "One wrong move, and this whole place goes up in flames." Keanu's mind raced. The man had them cornered, and the stakes were higher than ever. But as he studied the man's face, he saw something flicker in his expression, something uncertain, almost desperate. This was his chance. Keanu stepped forward slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "You don't have to do this," he said calmly. "Whatever you're after, this isn't the way." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't act like you know me, Reeves. You're just a face on a screen." Keanu took another step forward. "Maybe, but I know what it's like to feel powerless, to want to fight back." The man hesitated, his grip on the pistol faltering. For a moment, it seemed like he might listen, but then his face hardened, and he raised the detonator. "No more games," he growled. "This ends now." The deafening crack of a gunshot filled the air, and everything seemed to freeze. Keanu's heart stopped as he waited to see what would happen next. The gunshot reverberated through the warehouse, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Keanu stood frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. Time seemed to slow as he scanned the room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The suited man stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock. Blood bloomed across his shoulder, staining his pristine jacket. His grip on the detonator faltered, and it clattered to the floor, harmless. Keanu turned to see Detective Morales lowering his weapon, smoke curling from the barrel. His aim had been precise, disabling the man without endangering the hostages or triggering the bomb. "Don't move," Morales barked, stepping forward with his weapon trained on the man. The suited man grimaced, clutching his wounded shoulder, but staying still. His expression was a mix of pain and fury, but also something else, defeat. "Secure him," Morales ordered, and 2 officers moved in, restraining the man and confiscating his weapon. One of them retrieved the detonator, ensuring it was deactivated. Keanu let out a slow breath, the tension in his body finally releasing. He turned back to the hostages, who were still trembling but now looking at him with expressions of relief and gratitude. "It's over," Keanu said gently, helping one of the hostages to their feet. "You're safe." The officers quickly escorted the hostages out of the warehouse, leaving Keanu, Morales, and Gus alone with the subdued man. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of distant sirens. Keanu approached the man, his steps deliberate. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. "And why are you doing this?" The man smirked, his teeth stained red from a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. "You think you've won, Reeves?" he rasped. This was just the beginning. Keanu's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" The man chuckled darkly, wincing from the pain. "You'll see soon enough. You're in over your head." Keanu crouched down, meeting the man's gaze. "Tell me who you're working for." The man's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of defiance. "You'll find out when it's too late." Before Keanu could press further, the man suddenly convulsed, his body jerking violently. His eyes rolled back, and foam bubbled at his lips. "Get back!" Morales shouted, pulling Keanu away. One of the officers moved in, but it was already too late. The man's body went limp, his head lolling to the side. His breathing had stopped. "He's dead," the officer confirmed grimly. Keanu stared in disbelief. "What happened?" Morales inspected the man's mouth, his expression darkening. "Cyanide capsule," he said. He took his way out. Keanu's stomach sank. Whoever this man was, he had been prepared to die to keep his secrets. The realization only deepened the mystery and the danger. Gus spoke up, his voice trembling. "So, what now? If this guy's gone, how are we supposed to figure out what's really going on?" Keanu stood, his expression resolute. "We follow the trail. There has to be something here, files, equipment, anything that can lead us to whoever's behind this." The search of the warehouse was thorough but yielded little. Most of the equipment had been wiped clean of fingerprints or identifying marks. However, one officer found a hidden briefcase tucked away in a back room. Inside were several documents, along with a map marked with various locations across the city. Morales spread the map on a table, his brow furrowed. "These locations could be potential targets," he said, "or they might just be decoys." Keanu studied the map, his eyes narrowing. One of the marked locations was circled in red, a high-rise building downtown. "This one's different," Keanu said, pointing to the circle. "It's emphasized. It might be their next move." Morales nodded. "We'll deploy units there immediately. If they're planning something, we'll stop it." Keanu hesitated. "I'm going with you." Morales gave him a sharp look. "Keanu, you've already put yourself in enough danger. Let us handle this." Keanu shook his head. "Whoever's behind this is targeting me. If I'm not there, they might change their plans or hurt more people to send a message. I can't sit this out." Morales sighed, but didn't argue. "Fine, but you follow my lead, understood?" "Understood," Keanu said. Gus stepped forward, looking hesitant but determined. "Guess that means I'm coming too," he said. "Somebody's got to keep an eye on you." Keanu smiled faintly. "I appreciate it, Gus." The team arrived at the high-rise just after midnight. The building was dark, its windows reflecting the faint glow of the city lights. A perimeter had already been set up, and officers were stationed at every exit. Inside, the air was thick with tension as the group moved through the building floor by floor. Keanu stayed close to Morales, his senses on high alert. Gus followed nervously, clutching a flashlight like a lifeline. As they reached the 12th floor, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. A large room had been cleared out, and converted into a makeshift command center. Computers, surveillance equipment, and weapons lined the walls. But the most chilling discovery was the photographs. Dozens of pictures of Keanu were pinned to a bulletin board, each one taken from a different angle. Some were from public events, others from private moments he hadn't realized were being watched. A few had red X's slashed across them, like targets. "This just got personal," Morales muttered. Keanu stepped forward, his eyes scanning the photos. "They've been watching me for a long time," he said quietly. "Whoever they are, they've planned this down to the last detail." Suddenly, a faint beeping sound filled the room. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the source, a small device hidden beneath one of the desks. The beeping grew louder, faster. "Bomb!" Morales shouted. "Get out now!" The team bolted for the stairs, the sound of the beeping chasing them like a predator. Keanu grabbed Gus, practically dragging him along as they sprinted down the narrow stairwell. The tension was suffocating, every step feeling like it might be their last. They had just reached the third floor when the explosion hit. The blast roared through the building, shaking the walls and sending a shockwave that knocked them off their feet. Keanu hit the ground hard, the air driven from his lungs. For a moment, everything was chaos, fire, smoke, and the sound of crumbling concrete. When the dust began to settle, Keanu pushed himself up, coughing but alive. He looked around, searching desperately. "Gus! Morales! Are you okay?" he shouted. A weak voice answered from the shadows. "Still here," Gus croaked, his face streaked with soot. "But that was way too close." Keanu helped Gus to his feet, relief flooding through him. But Morales was nowhere to be seen. "Morales?" Keanu called, his voice echoing in the wreckage. Silence. And then, faintly, the sound of a phone ringing in the rubble. The faint ringing echoed through the dust-filled silence, a chilling sound against the backdrop of devastation. Keanu's heart pounded as he scanned the wreckage, his eyes narrowing in on the source. He scrambled over broken concrete and twisted metal, the ringing growing louder with every step. "Morales!" Keanu called again, his voice hoarse. "Can you hear me?" Gus, still coughing but determined, followed closely behind. "Man, I don't like this," he muttered, glancing nervously at the unstable walls around them. Keanu ignored the warning, his focus razor-sharp. Finally, he found it. Morales' phone, half buried beneath a pile of debris. He grabbed it, wiping off the dust. The screen displayed an incoming call from an unknown number. Keanu hesitated for only a second before answering. "Who is this?" he demanded. The same distorted voice crackled through the line. "Still alive, I see," it said, oozing satisfaction. "You're harder to kill than I thought." Keanu clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the phone. "Where's Morales? What did you do to him?" The voice chuckled. "Don't worry, your detective friend isn't dead yet. But he's in no position to help you now." Keanu's chest tightened. "If you've hurt him, you'll do what?" The voice interrupted, its tone mocking. "Face it, Reeves, you're just a pawn in my game. A very entertaining one, I'll admit, but still a pawn." Keanu forced himself to stay calm, his mind racing. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" There was a pause, as if the caller were savoring the moment. "You'll find out soon enough," the voice said. "But first, I have one more test for you." Before Keanu could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the phone, frustration boiling over. Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and the stakes were only getting higher. "Keanu," Gus said, his voice trembling. "What do we do now? If Morales is out there, we can't just leave him." Keanu nodded, his resolve hardening. "We're not leaving. We're finding him." The warehouse had been obliterated, leaving behind a skeletal frame and piles of rubble. Keanu and Gus worked methodically, moving debris and calling out for Morales. The air was thick with dust and smoke, making every breath a challenge. After what felt like an eternity, they heard a faint groan. Keanu's head snapped toward the sound. "Over here," he shouted, rushing toward the source. Beneath a collapsed beam, they found Morales. His face was bloodied, and his leg was pinned under the wreckage, but he was alive. "Morales!" Keanu said, dropping to his knees. Hang on, we've got you. Morales grimaced, his voice weak. You're stubborn, Reeves? Keanu managed a faint smile. You're not getting rid of me that easily. With Gus's help, Keanu lifted the beam, freeing Morales' leg. The detective winced in pain, but waved them off when they tried to carry him. I can walk, Morales insisted, though his limp was pronounced. We need to get out of here before this place comes down completely. As they made their way to the exit, Gus spoke up. So, what's the plan now? 'Cause this psycho clearly ain't done with us. Keanu glanced at Morales, who nodded grimly. We regroup, Morales said, and we figure out how to take this guy down. Back at the police precinct, Morales' team debriefed them, but progress was slow. The mysterious caller had covered their tracks well, leaving behind little evidence. The only lead they had was the map they'd recovered, which still held several marked locations. This is our best shot, Morales said, pointing to the map. If these locations are connected to the operation, we need to check them all. Keanu leaned over the map, his finger tracing the remaining marks. This one, he said, tapping a location near the city's industrial district. It's close enough that they could move quickly after the explosion. It's worth checking out. Morales nodded. Agreed. We'll send a team. I'm going with them, Keanu said immediately. Morales raised an eyebrow. You've already done more than enough. Let us handle this. Keanu met his gaze, unwavering. This isn't just about me anymore. Whoever's behind this is willing to hurt innocent people to prove their point. I can't sit this out. Morales sighed, clearly torn. Fine, he said at last. But you stick to the plan. No improvising. Keanu nodded. Deal. The industrial district was a maze of warehouses and factories, many of them abandoned. The team approached cautiously, their movements silent as they scanned the area for signs of activity. Keanu's senses were on high alert, every sound and shadow putting him on edge. They reached a nondescript building with boarded-up windows and a rusted metal door. Morales motioned for silence. This could be it, he whispered. Stay sharp. The team breached the door, their weapons at the ready. Inside, the air was cold and stale, the faint hum of machinery the only sound. The space was empty, save for a few scattered crates and a single desk. Clear, one of the officers called out. Keanu frowned, his instincts telling him something was off. This doesn't feel right, he said. It's too quiet. As if in response, a series of red lights suddenly illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A voice crackled through hidden speakers, low and menacing. Welcome, Mr. Reeves, it said. You've made it this far. Let's see if you can finish the game. Before anyone could react, the floor beneath them shook violently, and the sound of gears grinding filled the air. Keanu looked down to see a section of the floor opening up, revealing a deep, dark pit. The team scrambled to move, but the ground gave way faster than they could react. Keanu grabbed Gus by the arm, pulling him back just in time, but several officers weren't so lucky. They fell into the pit with cries of alarm, their voices fading into the darkness. Morales shouted for his team to regroup, but the sound was drowned out by the voice over the speakers. Tick-tock, Mr. Reeves, it said. The clock is always ticking. Keanu's eyes narrowed as he stared into the pit, determination blazing in his gaze. This ends now, he said. The pit was a yawning abyss, its depths obscured by darkness. Keanu stood at the edge, his jaw tight as he peered down. The cries of the officers who had fallen faded into silence, leaving only the chilling echo of the mysterious voice in the room. Tick-tock, it repeated, the distorted tone mocking. How long before you decide to jump in, Mr. Reeves? Morales limped to Keanu's side, his face grim. It's a trap. They want you to go down there. Keanu glanced at him, then back at the pit. It's the only way to end this. You don't even know what's waiting for you, Morales said. And we can't afford to lose more people. Keanu nodded, his resolve unwavering. I know. That's why I'm going alone. Gus stepped forward, shaking his head vehemently. No way, man. You think I'm going to let you just waltz into a death trap by yourself? Forget it. Keanu put a hand on Gus's shoulder. You've done more than enough, Gus. If something happens to me, you need to help Morales finish this. Gus's expression hardened. Nope. Not happening. If you're going down there, I'm going too. Morales sighed, rubbing his temples. This is insanity. Keanu offered a faint smile. Insanity seems to be the theme of the day. Without waiting for more protests, Keanu grabbed a nearby rope and secured it to a metal beam. He tested its strength before throwing the other end into the pit. The rope disappeared into the shadows, and for a moment, the abyss seemed to swallow the light around it. Ready? Keanu asked, looking at Gus. Gus swallowed hard, then nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. The two of them descended into the pit, their movements slow and deliberate. The rope groaned under their weight, but it held firm. The farther they went, the colder the air became, until it felt like they were climbing into the depths of a frozen tomb. Finally, their feet touched solid ground. Keanu shone his flashlight around, revealing a narrow tunnel lined with rough stone walls. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic, blood, maybe. This is creepy as hell, Gus muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. Keanu pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. He motioned for Gus to follow, and they moved cautiously down the tunnel. The sound of dripping water and their own footsteps filled the oppressive silence. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a cavernous room. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. At the center of the room was a large metal cage. Inside were the officers who had fallen into the pit, alive but bound and gagged. Over here, Keanu whispered, rushing to the cage. He examined the lock, his mind racing for a way to free them. A slow clap echoed through the room, stopping him cold. Well, well, the distorted voice said, now coming from a figure standing in the shadows. You never disappoint, Mr. Reeves. Keanu turned to face the figure, his flashlight revealing a man in a sleek black suit. His face was obscured by a mask, but his posture exuded confidence and control. Let them go, Keanu said, his voice steady. The man chuckled. Always the hero. But you're not in a position to make demands. Keanu took a step forward. What do you want? Why go to all this trouble just to target me? The man tilted his head. It's not just about you. It's about what you represent. Fame, fortune, the illusion of control. People worship you, Reeves, but I see you for what you are. And what's that? Keanu asked. A man, the figure said simply. Fallible, breakable. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. The sight of it made Keanu's blood run cold. It was another detonator. Your final test, the man said, holding up the device. Save the hostages or save yourself. Keanu's mind raced as he scanned the room. The cage was rigged with explosives, wires running along its base to a cluster of makeshift bombs. If the man pressed the button, it would all be over. But then Keanu noticed something else, a vent near the ceiling, just big enough to fit through. If he could distract the man long enough, Gus might be able to climb up and loop around to take him by surprise. Keanu looked at Gus, his expression calm but urgent. Do you trust me? Gus hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. What's the plan? Keanu leaned in, whispering quickly. Climb into that vent. I'll keep him distracted. When you get behind him, take him out. Gus swallowed hard. Got it? As Gus moved toward the vent, Keanu stepped closer to the masked man. You've gone through a lot of trouble just to make a point, Keanu said, keeping his voice steady. But you're just another coward hiding behind a mask. The man stiffened slightly, his grip on the detonator tightening. Careful, Reeves. You don't want to push me. Oh, I think I do, Keanu said, taking another step forward. Because no matter what you do, you're still going to lose. People like you always do. The man's laughter was cold and humorless. We'll see about that. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed through the room as Gus dropped down from the vent, landing directly behind the man. Before he could react, Gus tackled him, knocking the detonator from his hand. The device skittered across the floor, landing near the cage. Keanu lunged for it, grabbing it just before it could detonate. He quickly disarmed it, his hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The masked man struggled against Gus, but Keanu joined the fight, pinning the man to the ground. With Morales' team still in the cage, it was up to them to finish this. Keanu pulled off the man's mask, revealing a face he didn't recognize. The man's expression was a mix of fury and panic. "It's over," Keanu said, his voice low but firm. "You're done?" The man sneered. "You think this is over?" "This is just the beginning." Keanu stared at him, his heart pounding. "Then let's end it." Keanu stared into the man's eyes, his resolve unwavering. Around him, the cavern seemed to hum with a tension that had been building since the very beginning. This was the moment everything had been leading to. The man smirked, his face bloodied but defiant. "You're a fool, Reeves. You've played right into my hands." Keanu tightened his grip, pressing the man into the cold ground. "If you think I'm letting you walk away from this, you're the fool." Gus, standing nearby with the freed hostages, called out, "Keanu, we got the cops on the way. Let's just keep this guy tied up till backup gets here." Keanu glanced at Gus and nodded. "Good. Keep an eye on them." Morales, bruised but determined, limped over to help secure the man with a set of cuffs. "We've got him," the detective said, his voice weary but triumphant. "Let's end this nightmare." But the man only laughed, a hollow, unsettling sound that echoed through the cavern. "You think it's that simple?" he sneered. "You think arresting me will stop any of this?" Keanu knelt beside him, his gaze piercing. "What are you talking about?" The man leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm just one piece of the puzzle, Reeves. The people I work for, they're bigger than you can imagine. They control everything, politics, corporations, even the law. Taking me down won't change anything." Keanu didn't flinch. "Maybe, but it's a start." The man's grin faltered, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "You can't fight them," he said, his voice quieter now. "You'll lose." Keanu stood, towering over him. "I've faced impossible odds before," he said, "and I'm still standing." The authorities arrived minutes later, swarming the underground lair with a precision that brought a wave of relief to everyone present. The masked man was taken into custody, his threats fading into silence as he was hauled away. Morales coordinated the evacuation, ensuring the hostages were safely escorted out. Gus stayed by Keanu's side, his admiration for the actor now fully cemented. "You really are something, man," Gus said, shaking his head. "You didn't just survive all this, you stopped it." Keanu gave a faint smile. "I didn't do it alone," he said, clapping Gus on the shoulder. "You were there every step of the way." As the group emerged from the depths of the warehouse, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. The soft light bathed the city in a golden glow, a stark contrast to the chaos and destruction of the night. Morales approached Keanu, his expression a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "You did good in there," he said. "Better than most of my team would have." Keanu shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do in my position." Morales chuckled. "Not anyone, Reeves. You got something most people don't. Guts and a whole lot of heart." Keanu didn't respond, his thoughts turning to the masked man's ominous words. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. Gus nudged him, a mischievous grin on his face. "So, what's next? You gonna go back to Hollywood after all this? Maybe make a movie about it?" Keanu laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "I think I've had enough action for a while," he said. "But who knows? Maybe someday." The three of them stood together, watching as the last of the emergency vehicles pulled away. The city was waking up, unaware of just how close it had come to disaster. Keanu took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling his lungs. Despite everything, he felt a sense of peace. He had faced down a dangerous enemy, saved innocent lives, and proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could prevail. "Let's get some breakfast," Keanu said, turning to Gus and Morales. "I think we've earned it." As they walked away from the wreckage, the sun rose higher, casting a new light on the city. The battle was over, but the story of resilience, courage, and determination would live on.